Welcome back to Zevo Talks. My name is Weldon and I've been with Zevo for coming up to 2 years now. Today I'm delighted to be joined by some of the women here in Zevo Health. Davina Ramkissoon, who is our Wellbeing Director, our Head of Operations, Tracey, and finally Michelle Coates, who is the producer of Zevo Talks. We come from a broad background and different life experiences, which will hopefully give you, the listener, a well-rounded view of life as a woman in 2021, which has massively changed in the last generation. A woman's place was firmly at home. As recently as 1973, women in Ireland were expected to quit their job once they were married. Not even 50 years later, and this has all completely changed. The working world today is a vast contrast of what it once was, and we want to look at how far we've come and what limitations are still present today. So to start off this month, we have International Women's Day. So what does this day mean to each of you?
I think that this day is somewhat a day of reflection. It's an appreciation for how far we've come, but I think it's also very much a day to look back and see the gaps that are still there. Like as far as we've come, there's still things that are far from perfect. I thought early in the year, like the rest of the nation, I watched the Netflix show Bridgerton. And there was a lot of things in that show I think that people would comment on, but one thing I noticed was that when the daughters were getting married, the discussion always came back to the dowry and basically the payment of someone to join another family. And it's interesting to think because that's only a couple of hundred years ago. That was a thing then, but it's also still a thing in some parts of the world. Obviously, it's not as much in the Western world, but in the Western world, we very much rely back or look to the kind of the tradition that the bride's family would pay for the wedding. And it would kind of make you think, is that a 21st century kind of version of a dowry? And it kind of does make you think then, how far have we come and where we are now as a whole kind of thing.
Definitely, Michelle. I think that dowry element that you picked on, even in my culture, up until quite recently, would have been very apparent in, giving the woman, the bride away and having her absorbed into a new family. It's very interesting. And I think, just like, exactly what you said. It's all of those things that you mentioned. And for me as well, celebrating the achievements of how far we have come. The visibility of those achievements, and the piece around education. Like there's so much happening around education and trying to encourage young girls out of the stereotypes that would have been enforced on them, getting them more engaged in the sciences and having that filter through into industry as well. But like you're saying, that piece on advancement and equality and how much is left to do, there's probably still quite a lot more to do. And especially with the pandemic, there's a sense of we could be reversing some of those good changes that we've had as women feel more pressurized who may have children, who are at home working, to kind of step back into that full-time carer role whilst the other partner takes on the working responsibilities. So we're in a very pivotal time as well in the sense of what could come next.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I suppose for me, just echoing Michelle and Davina, it is a celebration. Things have changed dramatically, even in my own sort of career lifespan. What it was in the sort of the late 80s, early 90s to what the working environment is for women today has changed beyond recognition almost. But it's the theme of this year is choose to challenge, and that's, I think, for me it's enforcing that really in and empowering women to challenge. And I want to instill that in my own girls who are in their 20s at the moment, that sort of question everything mentality. I think I'd love to see that being pushed through and not accepting, what was, or the traditions or the norms, or just because it was how things were in the past. So it's a celebration for sure, but it's absolutely highlighting the things that need to be addressed still.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a celebration of women and women in kind of in power who I would look up to and idolize and aspire to push myself to be better than what I am, kind of, or what like to try and be better every day. But I also think it's important to, celebrate the women around us and who are close to us, and and recognize all the achievements, great or small, that we've all kind of achieved in our lives and like how we're successful. And especially I think, you know, in the workplace now, I've a lot of friends in different types of industries, and some would be heavily male dominated. So I take time as well to like look at my friends and say, you know, you've come this far and you've done this amount of work, and you've got, like, I've really successful friends, like female friends in different industries. And I just think it's a day that we have to look at ourselves, especially, and remember all the things that we've achieved and how far we've all come. And I definitely think, yeah, it's a celebration of just how great women are, essentially, like it is. And I think because the way that we were kind of, the way a woman can be stereotyped into particular roles in life, that it's important that we're battling these stereotypes and like looking at our achievements, not just as an achievement is to go to college, to get married, to have a child, that there's different types of female achievements now that are recognised. So that kind of brings us into the next question then. In the workplace, how can we counteract any negative stereotypes of women and enforce positive feminism in both our men and women?
Well, we could spend all day just talking about this and drawing out plans and strategies to solve the problem. But I really like what you were saying there, Ash, about being a cheerleader for people. Like really kind of, I think it can be really difficult at times for women or any individual to kind of reflect on where they've come from and what they've achieved, because the way in which our society is geared right now is it's always looking for the next milestone, the next achievement, the next thing, which means that we don't actually take time to take pause and reflect on how far we have come, and we minimize those achievements and those accomplishments. And sometimes it is having the support of someone really close to you to say, hold up, this is what you've done. I'm looking at your journey, and you know, it's not going to be smooth sailing. It's going to be painful along the way, but you're doing great. So I really would encourage that. And I guess the other thing I'd probably say on it is just, yeah, to become aware, like to not push the problem outside, to really become aware of what's happening internally for you. So we all have stereotypes, we all have biases, and whether they're conscious or unconscious, and it's becoming aware of that first. Before you can really take on the bigger picture and the bigger work that needs to be done. And that's where it kind of moves with the organization. You know, what are the unwritten rules of behavior? How is role modeling exhibited in an organization? What is seen as acceptable or not? And taking it that step further. But yeah, I think there's lots that we can all do every day when we show up to any interaction. You know, coming back to that, are we enabling someone to feel comfortable to voice to whatever opinion they have, or to bring their full selves to work, and to just feel like they're accepted as the way they are?
Yeah, and it's the whole of the workforce. It's not just the women in the workforce. It needs to be everybody, you know, because
yeah.
You know, it's equality. It's equality in lots of different areas, but it's the equal voice, it's the equal position, and as Davina says, it's that empowerment piece to make sure that everybody feels that they have an equal stance, I suppose, in the organisation, and they're able to be heard.
I think the language that we use as well is really important to battle stereotypes, and the language we use to talk about ourselves. So, you know, it's like if a woman is seen as assertive or decisive, she's seen as bossy or bitchy, and but we can also be guilty ourselves of using that language against ourselves. And then if we're putting it out there and other people are picking up on it, then, you know, you're bringing yourself down essentially, because that's not the case at all. Because a man who's seen as assertive is assertive. It's not, there's no other kind of like reason why they would be that way. So I think that it's our responsibility as well to choose better language to describe ourselves.
That's really interesting, Ash, that you mentioned that, because there's a good amount of research in that, and it's the gender biases. So what happens when a female behaves in tendencies that we would associate with a man? So that assertiveness. For a man to be assertive, we think that that's good leadership, but for a woman to do it, it's, yeah, exactly as you said, she's bossy, or, you know, asking too much. We challenge it more. And, you know, you hear those sayings of, that's not very ladylike, things like that, that come through just in the gender biases that we may already hold. And so if you're in a dynamic where someone is holding that bias of what it is to be female or male, you've got two battles there. You've got the internal battle of being the person who is just trying to do their job, maybe in whatever way they need to get it done. And then there's the imposed perspective of what other people think of you, and how your communication or your approach is viewed and analyzed. So it is quite, you know, it's not a one-way process. It's definitely two-way, probably even three-way, because it goes out and goes back, it's reviewed. And yeah.
So when I was in college, I remember one day we were in a lecture and it came up the conversation of feminism in broader society sort of thing. And there was who here would describe themselves as a feminist. I'm going to say out of a room of 200, maybe, I'm going to say about 40 hands went up and maybe 5 guys. And there was a girl in my course and she was Swedish and she was shocked. And I remember for about 3 weeks after, all we heard was, I can't believe this. And she just kept saying everyone where she was from, everyone in Sweden would describe themselves as a feminist. She just said that's the way it was, because she said a lot of people are a bit daunted by the word feminism. But if you replace feminism with equality, so instead of I'm a feminist because I believe in equality because, and I remember thinking, because like a lot of the times when you do hear people talking about feminism and stereotypes within women and that sort of thing, they go back to the fundamentals, fundamentals in anything.
So working in the wellbeing industry, there is quite an equal balance, if not slightly leaning to women being the majority, although it is important to continue to strive for equality. For someone listening, how can they encourage this in an organisation that may not be as female dominated?
It's a good question, isn't it? It's kind of back to what we were talking about before, rather than sort of, and even using the word enforcing feminism, you know, it's about equality, it's about equal rights, and ensuring that equal rights are a given in the organisation. That's what we're striving for, really. It's to make sure that, and I think as well as just saying, oh yeah, everybody should have equal rights, you know, what does that actually mean? I mean, there's equal rights when it comes to pay. There's equal rights when it comes to division of labour, for example, and they're fairly, in my mind, easy to get right, you know. But there's other sort of more complex rights that we want to sort of we want to kind of achieve in an organisation, and I think to do that, it's actually recognising the differences, and it's recognising the different needs of the people in your organisation. So I come to work, and I'm at a certain stage in my own life. So my needs and what I need to motivate myself to contribute to the organisation is going to be different to somebody who's maybe 20 years my junior and has a different set of motivations and needs and what's going on in their personal life. So I think the conversation needs to be just broadened out completely. It's great to see, for example, that the parental leave, the maternity leave, the paternity leaves are being, you know, extended and broadened, and that's kind of becoming part of the statute and part of our legislation, and that's great. And I think, you know, having that support from government is driving a lot of these conversations around what is actually important to people depending on the stage that they're in their life. And then that traditional model of, you know, okay, the working woman, you know, she gets pregnant, she's taking maternity leave, she's gone off to kind of care for the baby and the child, and then she kind of needs to figure out how she's going to manage, you know, to get herself back to work and all of that caring responsibility. Traditionally, that was kind of on her, you know, and it's nice to see that we're not anywhere close to where I believe we should be, but we are starting to have different conversations around, you know, the man's role, the father's role in all of this, and where he comes in and what does he need in his employment arrangement to facilitate the caring of a child that he has also brought into the world. So that's something I think that needs to drive the conversation as well. And whether that comes through government legislation or whether that is driven from, you know, the workforce, if you like, I think it needs to be continued as a conversation. And you know, as part of that conversation and part of that narrative, we will achieve some equality of rights or more equality of rights. But I think certainly where you have a more male-dominated workforce, and I've worked in those industries, it's difficult. It is very difficult, you know. And in my own personal experience, and I'm not speaking in general terms about workforce, I'm talking about my own personal experience. Women who are pregnant and who are raising families are seen, or were seen, as a bit of an inconvenience, really. You know, and she's at that age.
Yeah, that's really sad, isn't it? Really
sad.
Because you lose a lot of talent from the organisation.
Yeah, and that's kind of, that was the battle, wasn't it? That was the sort of the, you know, it was very difficult in my sort of early years and you know, of having children. It was difficult, and it was sort of it wasn't really a conversation that was had in the canteen, you know. And if you raised it in the canteen, you were seen as feminist.
You think that could come into like the recruitment stage as well, that if you're a woman of a certain age, that if you're applying for a job, that would be nearly taken into consideration as well, maybe, like that
I was asked directly in an interview, did I plan on having any more children?
Absolutely shocking, isn't it?
Because a man would never be asked that. And that's where the inequality, that, like, it's those little one-liners that are still the difference. There's still things there that need change. And
and let's not forget, raising a child is a full-time job, and it's not recognized. It's unpaid labor in essence, you know, and that child is going to go on and contribute towards the economy. Mm-hmm. So it all feeds into the right direction, you know, giving that woman, that family, as much of a stable foundation to nurture and develop a child is only going to do the state a benefit, because they're going to be able to be a productive member of society, contribute towards the economy, take up work, you know, all of these things that we need to keep the economy going. It is very sad to see that was the experience, and probably there might be some people who are still experiencing that.
Actually talking to my cousin yesterday. She became a first-time mother just before Christmas. She had her lovely little baby girl back in December. So she's obviously still on maternity leave and trying to come to grips with having a child. But she was basically saying she's a teacher, and she's obviously out on maternity leave at the moment, and she won't be due to go back till hopefully in September, but she'll see what COVID's like at that stage. But she was saying about it basically how she was, even though within a school, obviously the hours are structured, they're a lot different to an office 9 to 5. So she said the school would be usually closed 3:30, 4 o'clock-ish, but she's always been very involved, especially in green schools, that sort of area. But she was basically saying that it's not conducive with having a child and raising a child. And these things, even though for all the will in the world, things do get unorganised and things happen last minute. So if a meeting all of a sudden that was meant to be during lunch is now at 4 o'clock, she can no longer go because the 6-month-old baby isn't able to walk home from creche by itself, and that sort of thing. So she was basically just, even in a more female-dominant industry, which education has always been, there's still those kind of the unfair balance, even towards a woman that doesn't have a child necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that would leads kind of into our next question quite well. So as a woman, we have all had experiences where being a woman has both a benefit and a setback. So does anyone have any experiences of this they want to share?
We're all smiling. Oh,
Yeah.
Like, I think personally, you know, a setback for me would be, and like this is just quite personal, that like if I'm out walking but alone and it's dark and you know you see the group of kind of anyone, it could be one person by themselves or a group of people, and it's that initial kind of fear that I just feel is programmed into a lot of women, that it's like your fight or flight kind of thing. And I guess the older I've gotten, the more confident I've gotten in myself and my ability to, like, if I had to fight back, I would, I guess. But I think that's just something that anyone who I've ever really spoken to has kind of had the same fears if they're out kind of by themselves or walking alone at nighttime. But then a benefit of this, in a weird way, has been that my male friends that have spoken to me about this, because they've all kind of noticed it, that when if they're out walking and there's someone in front of them, a girl in front of them, that they're like, how can I like let this girl know that she doesn't have to be afraid of me, I guess. So, you know, they came to me and I was like, oh, well, you could take out your phone, start talking on the phone and, you know, say, like, so that they can hear a voice and they can hear kind of that there's someone, it's a person, it's not just this dark fear kind of walking behind them. It's a weird one, I guess, being a benefit, but I think the more we're open, or we're speaking openly about these little fears that we have, the more kind of people are like, oh, well, same. And then this is how you solve it.
Yeah. Isn't it fantastic to hear, though, that your male friends are so acutely aware of this, and, you know,
I think it's the education.
Yeah.
It's like they're more educated about, and I think they want to do better. If that, like, you know, there's a lot of things where it's we're pointing the finger at men and it's all their fault. But, you know, it's also how they've been brought up and the education that they've been given. So that's why it's kind of our responsibility somewhat as well to educate the men that are around us too, so that they can do better and they don't really have an excuse, because, you know, we can be like, oh, we kind of gave you tips on how to do this and this or whatever. So, but I do, yeah, I think it's more so that I think the last couple of years there's just been a lot of negativity in, like, for men in, like, against women kind of in the media. So any guy I think who thinks, you know, that they're not involved in that, then should be educating themselves so they can educate their friends too. So it's just like this one kind of pass of education.
On something similar to that, last night I was kind of doing a preparation for this conversation, and I thought to myself, I have one brother, so it's myself and my brother, so obviously female and a male. And I asked my mum, I just said to her, my brother is about 4 years older than me, and I said, when I was born and when my brother was born, I said, is there anything you felt you needed to instill in us, kind of thing, for my brother to be a certain way or for me to be a certain way, just purely on our genders? And what she said, quick enough as we were kind of becoming our own people, she was like, I knew both yous were able to stand up for yourself and all that sort of thing. Believe it or not, I'm actually the quiet one. But one thing she said, particularly with my brother Steve, was, she said, I never wanted him to be the Lord Muck, the kind of the king of the castle. She said it was actually more to do with him having a good respect for women and believing that he wasn't above these things. She said, my mum is from, she's from rural Ireland, and she grew up on a farm. And she said when she was about 20, her brother was about 17. And she said they were doing the dishes one day and he wanted a cup or something like that. And he was like, and she was throwing a tea cloth and said, well, dry it and wait for it. Try to do it yourself. And she said, I almost had to pick him up off the floor. I thought he was having heart failure. He couldn't get over it. As simple as something like drying a cup.
Definitely. I think family dynamics are, you know, where we kind of have a lot of subconscious kind of beliefs about gender come through, and how it can carry on playing out through our own kind of dynamics dependent on our role and gender. I have a really good story from when I was younger, and it's actually just of it was my PE teacher, so my physical education teacher, in secondary school. We must have been about 12, and he's male, and we're playing rugby. So he's teaching us how to tackle and to basically bring someone to the ground. And we're all lined up, and it's mixed class, so there's boys and girls in it. And it was my turn. I was meant to run up and tackle this lad down, and he was like a mini rugby player himself. He was solid. And I looked at my PE teacher, looked back at this lad, looked back at my PE teacher, and he just went, "Go on." And I was like, in my head, I was like, "Are you mad?" But then I was like, I ran after him, and I could hear my PE teacher going, "Drive your shoulder in, drive your shoulder in." And it was just, he was like, that sort of thing also has stayed with me, in the sense of, you've got, you know, someone who, you know, is kind of cheering on this little girl, in essence, or was littler at the time, against this big lad. And he's like, he's not seeing any of that, and he's trying to push me. And like, on reflection, and in light of the conversation that we're having, you know, those things also mean and carry a lot when you have those experiences with someone who is male or female, who's looking at you, and maybe you maybe have these limitations in your mind, and they're going, "So try it, go, push as hard as you can." And I think that's really, like, that's been one of the best kind of experiences from childhood as well, just having those teachers kind of just look at you and go, "So you can do it, kind of move, like, go through it." And that's really heartwarming to have had as well.
So then it can be a stereotype that women can be catty and may not be looking out for one another. Is it important in Zevo Health for women to build each other up?
Yeah, it's just important, full stop. You know?
Yeah, no matter where you are, no matter where you are.
World, you know, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it's just, and this, again, it's this stereotype of, oh, women are catty, you know, she's very bossy, you know. I mean, I've had sort of labels attached, and even in my younger years, you know, when I sort of started out on my HR career, you know, I had this sort of label of she's the mammy of the group, you know, and that's fine. And I'm still getting that label attached. She's the mammy of the group, and it comes from a couple of different aspects, and you know, what I'm sort of putting out there. And yes, I've caring nature. I hope I have a caring nature, and I do genuinely want to make sure that people are safe and happy in the workforce and in life, in my own sort of circle in general. But I've, you know, and that's fine. And yeah, the mammy of the group and the whole lot is fine to a degree. But then it gets to a stage where you're saying, yeah, but I'm not your mammy. you need to kind of go and figure that out yourself. And again, going back to the sort of, she's very assertive, and that means I'm bossy. So I'm the eldest of three, two younger brothers. And my mother brought us up as a single parent. So, and within a household of very, very strong women. So I grew up with two women raising me, effectively, my grandmother and my mother. My grandfather was there also. We kind of lived with him. So, but I grew up surrounded by just really, really strong, hardworking, determined women who, you know, they worked so hard that they didn't actually have time for the, you know, almost the niceties and the whole lot. But my mother is lovely. But I suppose, you know, you get this sort of label of she's assertive. That means she's bossy. She's, you know, and you know, can women be catty? I think people can be catty. You know, people can be mean to each other sometimes. You know, it's not just down to women. It's not that men are really nice and it's only women who are catty or make snide remarks, and the whole, that is across the board. You know, it really is. Should we build each other up all of the time? Absolutely, of course. We have to be able to lean on each other. We have traits that are unique to us as women that men don't share, and that we need to kind of support each other through. And there's different things that happen in our lives as women that men don't experience, and we need to be able to sort of share those experiences ourselves, understand them, and support each other through all of those different life stages, I guess.
Yeah, Tracey, I think that's really important. And I think it's coming back to the gender stereotypes. When you were talking, I'm just thinking of that. They're saying, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So if people are stereotyping you as the mammy of the group, and then you pull back and go, actually, you have to figure this out by yourself, then you receive backlash, or, because you're not fulfilling the gender stereotype that someone has of you. And I think maybe I'm throwing this out there, maybe us as women, like, we need to rewrite that stereotype on a collective level, and conversations like this are doing it. But I think it's that everyday interaction. What expectations are we putting on this individual, be it a woman, be it a man, but say it as a woman, are we holding her to that level that we have of a gendered stereotype in our mind? And then working with that to see, is that actually helping the situation? Is that actually helping me to figure out and grow through this process? It is interesting, some of the pandemic data has kind of shown, the countries that are being led by women are having better outcomes, and I think they were just saying it's more around like the proactivity and the collaboration around policy implementation, design and implementation. So I think there's something to be said there as well, and obviously that data is not conclusive. We're still going through the pandemic, but I think it is quite fascinating to see that finding has been observed. It is definitely going to make us think about women in leadership differently, and when you've got strong people like Jacinda Ardern, who are very transparent. She's very transparent in her communication. She doesn't fluff it up. She goes, she speaks honestly from the conversations that I can see of her speaking online, and I think that's refreshing to see as well.
I think as well, what Tracey said there, that everyone can be catty, and it's like, everyone who doesn't love a good rant, and sometimes you just need to vent and let off steam, and it's you just, and that kind of needs to happen, and it doesn't need to be seen as catty or anything. It just needs to be seen as a personal release, I think, that you're just kind of blowing off steam and then it's forgotten about. And it's like, my housemate, he's a guy and he's just as able to have that same rant that I would, or to be just as catty as I am. And I think that it's just, I love the saying, it's my favorite saying, that empowered women empower women.
Yeah.
So it's just so important that, we're constantly pushing each other to do our best and to offer help when help is needed, and just to be willing and open to listen to people, and not, even if someone is having a rant, to not be judging them for being a certain way or putting a label on that rant or calling it catty, just listening and saying, okay, you needed to vent, so I'm listening, and then it's forgotten about and you move on.
I think everyone's worked with women that are catty, bitchy, whatever, in the exact same way we've all worked with men that are catty, bitchy, whatever other phrase you want to put on it. I think it's very easy to throw that label on women. Being
women in the working world, how do you think the voice of the woman has changed over time?
Well, I think it's listened to a lot more. I think, and again, like we've been speaking about this, there's still a lot more to do, but it's having people at the table, having women at, the leadership tables, and, seeing that reflected in all other organizations. That's, that it is, it's acceptable to have women there. They wouldn't have been able to, like Tracey was saying, you get pregnant, you leave the workforce, that's your kind of career over. It's thinking more flexibly around what is a career to anyone who wants to take on caring responsibilities, to have a family, to take a step back from a career, come back, join, start a different path. And I think one of the things that I've seen is that transition, in the sense of some of the most interesting people that I've worked with have come to their positions but they haven't followed the traditional path. They've maybe started in one career, moved to another one, kind of sidestepped into another position, and they've taken all of that knowledge, expertise and skills with them, which makes them a stronger and well-rounded individual when they are coming and they are at that table, because they've got so much experience to pull on, to draw on, to talk and to troubleshoot, and that shouldn't be lost. Coming back to that pandemic point around, are we going to see women exit the workforce because of the external pressures? Like, I hope we don't have that, because having a child, and I don't have one, but seeing my sisters have children, it's very stressful, but it enriches your life. You see life from a different perspective, and having that represented in the workplace is going to be important for the future generations. We're seeing different needs being voiced from the younger generations entering the workforce, and I think it's 2050, 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. So there's going to be a huge seismic shift that's going to come through, and you're going to have to bring them with you. You can't just say I'm at the top and I've got it all figured out. It's going to constantly evolve, but it is good to see that more voices are being heard. You're seeing groups pop up, so there's full campaigns around women in tech or women in leadership. That's mirrored across the media, with challenging the stereotypes around run like a girl. I think Always were the one that did that, and having it mirrored across so many different layers in our society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what we're seeing as well, I guess, employers, particularly some of the very big companies that are out there, are recognizing the profitability, to be frank, that's had in making sure that your leadership team has gender equality, that your women in leadership are very much front and center of the decision-making process in your organization, that your benefits package is reflective of the entire workforce and responds to the needs. And as you said, Davina, the workforce needs have evolved, and I think the demand for a more equal workforce is becoming louder and louder, and it's fantastic to see, because I don't think that, I hope that the pandemic won't put women's rights on any sort of backward footing. I do hope that it continues, and the workforce changes and adapts to what everyone needs, man, woman, whatever, it's whatever needs the individual has, that they're met within their working life. For myself, and just to touch on what you said, Davina, people change careers, change their skill set, they re-educate themselves, they reskill themselves, they change according to life, because life changes, and you can have a plan, and you can be saying to yourself, okay, in the next 20 years I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Life will throw different curveballs at you, and anything can happen to throw you off that course, and being able to adapt to that, and being empowered to adapt to that, and having support that allows you to adapt and to grow and to develop and to move on, and that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I think as well. So I would have had my first job when I was 16, and just working in kind of a Eurospar, nothing too major, but my managers and the kind of anyone who was in a management or leadership role, it was all male, they're all men. And I guess kind of 14 years on now, I feel quite lucky that I get to work in a company that has a lot of women and female people, has a lot of women in leadership roles. And for me it's great, because it kind of that's a huge thing for me, that I can see, okay, there is the chance, and I can progress and be kind of in a more powerful role, or a leadership role. So in my kind of way, that's how the voice of women has changed in the workplace, that I've gone from seeing a lot of men in leadership roles to now a lot of women. So for me, it's changed.
We were chatting there, I was just thinking about all the managers I've had over the years and all the people that were above me. I think it was my 4th job before there was any woman manager. Like, she wasn't even my manager, but just any sort of female manager. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the questions towards individuals now. So I suppose the first would be for Aisling. Ash, have you ever felt a change in how you're viewed because you're a woman?
Yes and no. I guess it goes back to kind of what I was saying before, that when I was in school, so I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and the first kind of difference that I noticed between the girls' Catholic school and the boys' Catholic school was that we're doing home economics and the boys are doing woodwork. And I was a bit like, why can't I take on those types of subjects? It's because they're seen as male subjects, and the home economics was seen as a female subject because they didn't have that like option to home economics either. And then I guess it was the expectation that my life would look a certain way. So it would be to go to school, go to college, get a job, then get married, buy a house, have children, and that's kind of the way that it was set out. And while I was in school as well, I always fit into like the alternative group of people, I guess. Like I like to dye my hair, I was interested in piercings, tattoos, that kind of thing, and they were never seen then as ladylike or feminine. So because of that, I kind of went through a lot of different phases of style and kind of trying to figure out who I was, and eventually kind of coming back to who I was when I was 16. So I'm back at my coloured hair. So I think that for me, the treatment wasn't necessarily like, it was more so how I was reading into things. So even like how I was supposed to look as a woman and the image of women in media, and how it's changed to now is that there's far more representation of different types of women in the media, and there's far more opportunities, I guess, to just be who you actually want to be as yourself without judgment, because it's just a bit more normalized, I guess, to be a bit different, if that makes sense. I think now, though, things that would have bothered me maybe when I was younger because I didn't know how to handle them don't bother me anymore. But I also don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, because have I just gotten used to being treated a certain way?
Can I just say one thing? When you said about the home ec in school, I remember I live at the top of a hill and all the schools are at the bottom of the hill. And I used to remember there was two schools there. There was a boys and a girls, both Catholic, so I went to a convent. And I used to remember the girls were walking down with their bags, with their flour and their eggs and their whatever they were making that week at home ec. And all the lads would have this stick poking out of their bag for woodwork. And it was just, even from a distance, of the girls were wearing the skirts, because God forbid we wore trousers. But even from a distance, you could see the obvious, like the immediate difference kind of thing. It's crazy that even it's instilled in us from so young.
Because even like that instills then that our job in the home is going to be in the kitchen, and the man's job is going to be the DIY stuff, whereas I'm actually unreal at DIY. I love to cook, but I really enjoy DIY, and I always think back, what if I had the chance to do woodwork in school? Like, could I be in a different place now? Could I be, that kind of way? So I think kind of society has had a lot to do with kind of, our upbringing, obviously, and like what we're expected to do and what our lives are expected to be. And now it's a bit, it's okay to live kind of a different kind of life. Like, you don't have to do those steps, which I think is a good change. It's not always expected. I think hopefully people are a bit more open-minded to different kind of lifestyles.
And hey, Aisling, it's never too late to take up woodwork, so you got it. But Michelle, even what you're saying, we went through a huge petition in my secondary school to get girls able to wear trousers. There was huge kind of, I'm not sure what the reasoning was, but they didn't want girls wearing trousers to school for some reason. They wanted us in our skirts with, our nice socks, color coordinated socks and all that stuff. Now it did come through, but like, I can probably assume, maybe wrongly or rightly, what the reasons and rationale were, but it was even that a challenge to get girls to be able to come to school. Like, who wants to be in a skirt in the middle of winter, things like that.
It's like ours was a kilt, so a bit of wind came and the wind and like even now the uniform is still the kilt.
And Michelle, have you ever found expectations as a woman that simply aren't expected from men? For example, the assumption that because you're a woman, you want children.
Yeah, 100%. I think the gender norms in society, because they're instilled in you from so young, it's in your brain, if you like it or not. There's so many things that you automatically think this is the way it should be. Like, as you said, when you're in school, when you're a child, you do gravitate towards a certain lifestyle, like your own, it's in your DNA. But then society around you is saying that as a young girl, you'll go to school, you'll do X, Y, and Z subjects, you'll go to college, and then obviously the only thing any woman wants is a baby and a husband, because they're the obvious things. A few months ago, it was just after Christmas, and I was on the phone, it was for work actually, and the woman I was talking to she said something about her family over Christmas, and I mentioned, me and my boyfriend did something over Christmas, and she was like, oh, is there a ring coming? Is there a baby on the way? Like, I was like, no. I'm mid-20s. I was like, that's not anywhere on the agenda. Like, don't you worry. I mentioned it then to my boyfriend, Jack, and he was taken aback. He thought that was crazy. He was like, I couldn't imagine anyone saying that to me. And I just thought, like, nobody would say it to you. Because obviously, as a woman, that's the only thing that apparently is on my brain. But even the fact that came from a woman, it wasn't, I don't know if it'd be worse or better that it's from a woman, but it was either way. Yeah. I suppose then as well, one thing over the weekend, I don't know if anyone saw, it was a female commentator, and she was doing a interview with a rugby player after the England match on, I think Saturday. Yeah, I'm not a rugby person, sorry. And she was reduced to tears. She was basically got abuse online.
Yeah.
And it just really showed that for as far as we've come, sport is one area that just doesn't seem to be, even the fact that we say the women's football, like I'm from Dublin, obviously, so the Dubs have won the last year was the buzzing for half a dozen, so they're doing fantastically well, as are the women. But the women's football, even the fact we describe it as the women's football and then the Dubs and the Dublin, like, there has to be the differentiation there. And sport is something, and like just being active overall is something that everyone should be a certain amount in their lifestyle. So why, when it comes to anything to do with a sport or like a bigger game, do we have to do the differentiation there? It doesn't make sense, because as children we're all packed off for our lunches to go to, go down to the local GAA field to whack a hurl around or whatever. Why is it different? It seems crazy. I think then when it was so public at the weekend, like a BBC reporter, you know what I mean? Like, you just don't expect that sort of thing in the modern age.
Yeah, and she almost got double the backlash for crying.
Yeah, God forbid she had feelings.
God forbid she had an emotion, so she cried because the man wouldn't cry. He'd kind of take it on the chin, and just when you were talking about sort of the gender stereotypes that we instill in kids, my brother, the youngest guy, when he was little, for Christmas he wanted the big yellow teapots. He wanted a big yellow teapot, and he wanted a post office. And the middle guy, the older guy, was he was into sort of tanks and helicopters and all this, blow it up and shoot type of thing. And he got he got his big yellow teapot and played happily for months. He got knocked great crack out of this thing. And we would slag him over the years. We'd always say, do you remember when he got the type of thing? And his hero at the time, he killed me for saying this, was sort of J.R. Ewing in Dallas, and he had a big Stetson, and he, this was what he did. He was a little boy, he was 5, and this is what he did. We slagged him so much over the years. His son is now 10, and I have nieces who are 7 and 15, and they're very close, and they're growing up together and the whole lot, and his son wanted a doll and pram. So he got a doll and pram, and it was just, here you go, yeah, that's what, and a couple of years, sort of Daniel was running around with this doll and pram and the whole lot, and it did not, you know, define any of those kids. It you know, it didn't define my brother. It doesn't define, you know. So the more that we can do as the adults and the influencers around children to kind of strip away all of that stereotypical behavior and labeling, and you're this and you're that and you're going to be this and this is what the expectation, if we can get in there really early and just, you know, level the playing, literally level the playing field, I think we stand a much better chance as a society to kind of creating that equality.
100%. And it's that judgment piece, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people would feel comfortable to do that, but then, oh, what will that person say? Or, you know, like that feeds into our behaviors as well. And I think, yeah, you're dead right there as well, Tracey, on that front. My little niece, she's 2 now, just turned 2, and she's got all her father's old kind of racing cars. He kept them all from his childhood. She has her favorite car. She won't go to bed without it. Like, and she's happy, you know, playing. Yeah, and it's just a child at the end of the day. And I think you raise much more kind of confident children, confident in themselves, if they don't feel that they have to fit that potential stereotype that's being imposed on them. And Michelle, just on the pregnancy point, not sure if you've seen, but there's like this whole kind of campaign around don't ask a woman about whether she's going to have a child or not, because you don't know whether she can have children. You don't know whether she's had 5 miscarriages and she's trying her desperate hardest to conceive a child. It's a very loaded question, and I think it's just having that awareness again that we don't know what everyone else is going through. And how that question might actually harm more than, you know, and I think probably from the other perspective, it's a genuine interest to want to see our life progressing in a way which is traditional and brings comfort. But it's probably just really being mindful about how close you are to that person, whether you are really close and whether they want to talk to you about it or not, because it is such a personal issue.
Davina, I know you have previously spoken about the voice of women both inside and outside the workplace. What have your experiences with having your voice been like?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think I've been fortunate enough that I've had very strong women surrounding me. So my mum, my 2 sisters, and that has really kind of helped me to develop and mature into the woman that I am today. And I think what has then mirrored that is throughout work, I've had very strong women leadership as well, probably in most of my roles, to be honest. But there have been occasions where you're in meetings and, you know, I've one experience where I was the specialist, the subject matter expert on an issue. And a question, it was actually coming from a female at the time who wasn't my manager. So she asked the question, I answered it. She asked the same question, a male paraphrased what I said, and she went, okay, great. And it happened 2 more times in that same meeting. And afterwards I chatted to the male and I was like, what just happened there? And he was just like, no, like I didn't see any of that. It's not, it's in your mind. And I'm going, but you're not a specialist in that subject. And you've basically taken, you know, what I said and didn't add anything novel to it. So we had a good chat about it. And I kind of feel like when those instances happen, it doesn't help to kind of get annoyed or angry, even though that might be the basic, you know, instinct to do that. But I really value the time just going, like being able to speak to my male colleague at the time and just be like, what happened there? and to kind of talk it through with someone who was on my team. But I think it also says, like, the thing I try and do is maybe try and not take it too personal, even though it is very irritating. because it speaks more about the other individual and where they're at. And I'm not going to be able to change their perspective in one meeting. So maybe, Ash, similar to you, it's like controlling the controllables. You have to try and find a way to balance everything. And so I'm sure, there are people like even yourselves here have maybe had that experience, whether in personal life, and you have to try and find your very best to be firm and grounded in what you're saying. And the rest, after that, it is for the other individual to decide how they're going to respond and react. I think having your integrity in what you're doing is really important to try and maintain. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I think a lot of people probably, as I said, have experienced that. And I try and use those situations as learning as well, like I said, like that reflection piece and talking it through with people and not just bottling it in, because it's not going to do me any good, like my well-being, my psychological health, So yeah, I think as I'm getting older, it's happening less and less. But yeah, it definitely has happened in the earlier days in my career.
Yeah, I think sometimes when someone tells you that you've imagined something or it happens in your head, it's almost, you're just like, no, did you not just see what just happened there? And I think it makes you doubt then, are you just being kind of oversensitive or did it actually happen? But I think just being confident in, no, I know what I said and I know it was kind of, I had to be when you said it had to be paraphrased by a man to be understood. It just, Tracey, so you have 2 daughters in their 20s. What was your experience of raising 2 girls? Did you find a struggle being a mother and working, and were employers flexible to this?
In 1996, no, they weren't. It's a short answer to that one. Yeah, so I had my eldest girl in 1996, and at that time maternity leave was 12 weeks. So had Kira in October and was due back to work basically just after Christmas in the January. You could take an additional, I think, 4 weeks unpaid leave. It was barbaric, to say the least. I felt. So I guess just to kind of frame, like we were recently married, newly married, new house, and literally had the new baby. So I was the stereotypical, new mum. And where I was working at the time, I'd left school quite early and spent sort of the next however many 10 years or whatever doing in manufacturing, in the manufacturing industry. And what that meant was I was working in a high-tech manufacturing plant. And we were running shift work. So not only was I expected to go back to work after 12 weeks after having a baby, I was expected to go back to work on 3 shifts. So I'd have to go back and work sort of 8 to 4, 4 to 12, and then the night shift, which was 12 to 8. So I did go back. I went back in the October, and my husband was working full time as well. We needed the 2 incomes coming into the house, as most people will understand. And I had an aunt who said that she'd take care of her, and to say that I was less than useless in the workplace when I did go back, because it was such, for me personally, it was just such a wrench to be away from her. She was just too small, and you're literally handing over this newborn baby to somebody else to look after, and way off you go, So it didn't do me any good at all, as you can imagine. And quite quickly I found that I was on leave again, and I just needed to take some time and I needed to be at home with her. So how that was addressed by my employer was a knock on the door of my house on an afternoon, and basically the HR manager at the time coming in and saying, how are you doing? Everything okay? Are you okay to come back to work then next week? And I'm going, no, I'm not actually. I've been signed off, which I had at the time. And him saying, okay, we'll just leave it there then. You can, I don't think there's any point. And basically before he left the house, I had signed a resignation letter. So that was 1996.
Okay. Shocking.
God.
Right. I was lucky enough to be able to you know, we managed and we made the decision as a family and as a couple that I would stay at home with the girls. You know, I had Tara within 2 years. And for us, it was the right thing to do, for me to be able to be at home with the girls in those sort of first very early years, you know, and that was just a decision that we were lucky enough to be able to do. Financially, we could afford it, and it was great, you know. So sort of skip forward a few years, and both of the girls were now at school, and I had realised that I had sort of sacrificed my own education in being, you know, forging my own way as a woman, and I'll do what I want, and, you know, I'm going to go out and earn and all of this kind of crack. And I made a decision myself that I needed to re-educate myself. So when they went to school, I went to school, got my education, and decided that for me as a working mother at that, or as a mother at that time, I didn't want to go back into that sort of shift work manufacturing, you know, so I needed to make a decision. And at the same time, my marriage sort of broke down. So I found myself back in education as a single mother, and now looking for a change in career and a complete change in direction. And I guess for me, my observations of, you know, the 90s, the 80s, 90s, and that sort of very heavy industry, manufacturing industry, and the traditional workforce and what that looked like and what that workforce was like for women had changed dramatically by the middle of sort of, you know, mid 2000s, I guess, and 2006, I found myself at the start of what was to be, I described my second career, which was in HR and business administration and all of that, you know. And it was a stark contrast with the two. And as I said earlier on, you know, I think the rights and the equality of women has been shored up through legislation, as opposed to employers going, we weren't very fair, were we? Let's decide we're going to do it differently. The government and the legislation said, you're going to do it differently, you know, and here are the rights, and here's what women need to enable them to have families and to go off. So the maternity leave obviously was extended. It was the introduction, I think, as well of like this notion of parental leave and term time and flexi leave around, you know, school going kids. So I was lucky enough that I was able to work full time. I was able to afford sort of childcare, and I had a decision to make, you know, because a lot of my peers and colleagues were sort of doing, you know, the 20-hour week and getting this support and all of that, you know, and that worked fine for them. It was a conscious decision that I made for myself, that I wanted to be in full-time employment. I wanted to get my third level education. I wanted to educate myself, because I didn't want my girls to think that, you know, that leaving school early was a good idea. I wanted them to understand their right to their education and how important their education was, and to really give themselves the best chance that they possibly could at life. And I didn't want to be, you know, a barrier to any of that in any way. So for me, it was a personal choice, but it was a struggle. It was a struggle. Were employers flexible? They were a little bit more flexible in the 2000s than they were in the 90s, for sure. But it's still really, really difficult. And I think to pretend otherwise would be slightly naive. It's hard to have everything. It's hard to have, you know, the full-time job. It's hard to have, you know, I was studying at night as well, you know, over the course of 4 years. And like that, life throws all of these different challenges at you, and you have to sort of, in the moment. I remember driving to work one morning. I was driving the kids, the girls, to the childminder, you know, at sort of 20 to 9 to drop them off. And she rang me to say that she decided that she didn't want to be a childminder anymore from there. It was like I had 20 minutes to kind of figure something else out. but that's what you roll with. That's what, you know, everybody has different challenges. Everybody has something going on in their personal lives, and for what we can do as an organization, and particularly as women in an organization, is really kind of gather around, you know, and that sort of, you've heard that that analogy, you know, it takes a village to raise a child, and what that means, it really truly does. Actually, it's not just about, you know, you're a mother, therefore it's on you to bring up this person, you know, and to have all of that responsibility. It is not. It's the whole family. It's both parents. It's also, dare I say it, you know, the employer. It's also the organizations. We're contributing to these organizations. We're giving, you know, what we have. We're giving our experience and coming with our skills and our qualifications, and we're really giving everything that we have to an organization. And I think, controversial, but I do think it's time now that is completely recognized, and that our personal needs are met.
I don't know if I'll ever be overhearing 12 weeks from maternity leave. It's so short.
Yeah, look, it was of its time, and still the 90s was a little bit odd, because we were all, you know, we were after Italia 90. The country was we were having great crack. You know, the banks were loaning lots of money. We were buying lots of houses. You know, we were the sort of, you heard the taxi drivers and having the holiday home in Bulgaria type of thing. You know, the country was really booming, like properly booming, the likes of which we'd never seen. And jobs were aplenty as well, you know, and everybody was sort of enjoying that. And I suppose when I think about that, when I say that we were able to, and we were comfortable enough, and I was able to stay at home, I kind of let that slide, because I kind of said, oh, okay, right, okay, well, look, I get to be at home with the girls, you know. And my feminist side didn't sort of go, what the hell just happened? You know, how dare, you know, I be put in that position if that was my husband? That would never, ever, ever happen. It just wouldn't consider. It just wouldn't consider that. But actually, physically coming into somebody's home, and that wasn't unusual. That's the thing. It wasn't an unusual, you know, situation to be in. It was still wrong, and, you know, probably I've no doubt could be challenged. But at the time, culturally, it just wasn't.
Yeah, like my mom would have stayed at home with us and didn't go back to full-time work until my younger sister went into school. And now she didn't go back to college or anything. She didn't go back to education, but she did like courses and things so that she was able to brush up on her typing skills and stuff. And now the way she sees it is, because she started work later, she has to finish work later. So she's kind of done this full-time job as being a mother, and is now working a full-time job, and is going to continue to work a full-time job until she's like older than my dad would be retiring this year, whereas I think she has another maybe 10 years of service left. And she just, she's going to be older working, and I know that we're finishing work at an older age, but I think it's that kind of thing of where she's already done, you know, shall we say, or I guess by the time my sister would have been going to school, my brother would have been nearly 10. So she's done 10 years of doing the full-time job on top of kind of going back into work then again.
Yeah, absolutely. And would have had, you know, her pension affected, for, you know, so that's probably what I'm speaking for your mum, that's probably why she feels the need to, you know, so that it right across our society, it never got the work that women did within the home was very undervalued always, you know, and perhaps still is. And it just doesn't get the recognition. And we could talk for another hour if we think about the history of this country when it comes to how we treated women and children. And you know, and right across society. And it wasn't just, you know, what the church did or what the state did, or, you know, it was everybody's involvement in that whole period, that shameful period, really. But I think definitely we've come a long way. We have come a long way in how we treat women and children, and specifically, I suppose, women and girls, you know, within Ireland. We have, but we're not there yet. And I think to pretend otherwise would be naive.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's still a lot in the sense of acknowledging us as, you know, human beings that have rights, you know, over our own body, over what we want to do, over how we want to live our life. You know, things that have come up that, you know, Michelle, Aisling, Tracey, we're all speaking about. It's a much bigger societal picture, isn't it? It's like you're saying, that village piece, you know, well, who are the people in that village? And it's not just people in your immediate household and your immediate family, it's the whole society, the whole economy, that feeds into how that individual develops.
So we'll end on some more lighthearted questions. So if you could have a dinner party pre-COVID, and you can invite 3 women, dead or alive, who would you like to invite?
Michelle, you go first.
I think, well, to be honest, at this stage, I'd have anybody over for a dinner party. I think first of all, this is very obvious and very cheesy, but I do love Michelle Obama. I think she stands for great things. She's very into... I talk with Michelle Obama, I'm going to say twice a week. I've read her. If you haven't watched her documentary on Netflix and read her book, I highly recommend them. But she does stand for very good things. She's very much believes in the girls. Big one for advocate for education. She's very good for just overall well-being. And then, obviously, I suppose, Black in America, she's very much a huge one for civil rights and for equality across the board. So I think she's a fantastic woman. I think for my second, I would have a family member. I think I would have my she was my grandfather's sister, my Auntie Peggy. She was a fantastic woman. If she was alive now, she'd be early 90s. But when she was alive, I think she was ahead of her time in the kind of way that, just say my grandmother, she's gone as well, but she wouldn't do anything without my grandfather, and she was very much that the women was with the husband. Peggy was not about that. Peggy went off on her holidays and she went off to Spain for 3 weeks, and she came back with her duty free or like different things. I remember once we were at a family occasion and she was like, "Did you hear about that Jay-Z?" And I was like, "What?" He only went and cheated on Beyonce. And this was like an elderly 80s woman. She was just so with it, and she had such a I think if she lived her life to the max. She was just a fantastic woman, and I don't know, I just think everything about her, she was amazing. If you could bring her back, I would. And I think then for my last one, I kind of have 2, but I'm kind of thinking I'd go with Princess Diana, purely because I think she was fantastic, again, for women. She did fantastic things for the world as a whole. I think she opened people's eyes up to a lot of social issues. And I'd be dying to get the scandal as well, to be honest. And she seems like a good time. So I think they'd be my 3.
Brilliant. Who had I? So I've written these down. So Dawn French, because I just love her, and for the crack, definitely would want Dawn at my dinner party. Christina Noble as well, of the Christina Noble Foundation. I just think she's a children's rights activist, and what she's done for the children in Vietnam, Cambodia. I've seen the movie, I've read one of her books, and the whole her own story is just the resilience, the tenacity. She just keeps going and going, and with good grace and with a sense of humor, and coming through all of that adversity. So I'd want to hear her story firsthand, for sure. And then really weird one. So the last one, I'm really interested in the Tudor wives and that sort of period of history. So I'd love to meet all of the Tudor wives, right? I'd love to meet all of them. But Anne of Cleves in particular, I think I'd invite to my dinner party, because she is reported to have negotiated her way and narrowly sort of avoided the axe, really. And she did it in a way that was very, very clever, ahead of her time in terms of how she sort of dodged that one. And yeah, so just for her negotiation skills and to find out what really happened.
For me, with the exception to my mother and my two sisters, I just got to say that in case they listen to this and they go, "Why didn't you pick us?" Because they're just phenomenal women, anyways. But when I was thinking about this, there is a clinical psychologist named Edith Eger. I think she's in her 90s now, but she was a survivor from Auschwitz. And the Holocaust, and like her story is just absolutely breathtaking, all that she endured, and then how far she grew, in the sense of she moved to America, she had her children, she decided to go back to study. Well, not go back, she didn't have the chance to study. I think she went into concentration camps when she was 14. So, you know, and then at 50, she did her clinical doctorate. So she's got some amazing, she's written some great books, and her, there's the way she speaks about her experience, the kind of, the healing that had to happen throughout and continue to happen throughout her adult years, and how it was kind of, re-emerged through different aspects of raising children, her own children, and her own kind of life experiences that affected her. Like, story's phenomenal. I would definitely say, if you haven't read much about her, like, she's amazing woman. The second person, then, similar vein to you, Michelle, like, I would be really interested to meet like my great grandmother, you know, to kind of see and contrast where and how they lived their life, and even just I would say kind of the contrast of how I'm living my life as, you know, raised as a Western woman, and the contrast to the Eastern world and the cultures, and the variance in how we've both, like, how I've been raised and how they would have been raised. I think that would be really humbling and to hear. And there's always a lot of wisdom in the older generation, and hearing them speak, even from my I've only got one grandma alive right now, but you know, it was great conversations with my grandparents about their lives and what they went through, and just like hearing that perspective, it's sometimes you can't put words on the things that they endured. But you know, as being a woman, having a child, you know, being the woman of the house, and things like that. So I would be fascinated to meet someone back in my ancestral past. And then last but not least, I'm gonna have to throw it out there, Beyonce. Like, why would you not want? Like, I've watched documentaries of her and her work ethic, her, you know, just the way that she applies herself to what she does is outstanding. It'd have to be Beyonce. Have to have her at the table. Maybe have a few songs as well.
I'm really surprised you didn't say Oprah.
I think my three, so it would be Hayley Williams from Paramore, she's the lead singer, Lady Gaga, and then probably Tracey. All three women in music, just because Hayley Williams was the first kind of punk rocker female lead in a band that I'd seen in such a huge venue when I was 16, and really kind of shaped my taste in music, my taste in style. And, you know, she's still making music today just as a solo artist. I'm a huge fan of the Cranberries, and Tracey as well, just her music. And then just even that she sounds Irish, I always just appreciated that from her. And then Lady Gaga, kind of the same with Beyonce, like such great work ethic. I just adore her. Me and my sister went to see her in the Aviva, and we cried for the whole concert, and it's just like I've so much admiration for her. So I think they'd be my three. Finally, on International Women's Day, what is the most important message you want to send out to young women starting off on their career?
Go for it, girl. You got this. And I think just always keep aligned to a higher purpose. I think it's so easy to get caught up in the stuff that absorbs us and our energy and emotions and time, and it's pointless. And it can, and some of it, is important to our development. But I'd say don't get stuck there. Have the experience, reflect, use that, put it in your toolkit, but keep that vision of what you want to achieve, in 10, 20, 30 years.
I think I'd say two things. I think I'd say you're doing better than you think you are, because we're all our worst critic. And just if you're worried about anything, always think, will it matter even in 2 weeks? Will it matter in a month? Will it matter in a year? Most of the time, 99% of the time, the answer is a no. Even if it won't matter in a week. So just always kind of relate it back to that.
Yeah, I think mine comes nicely from that as well. It's don't be so hard on yourself. We're all human, we all make mistakes. And I sometimes think if you're not making mistakes, especially starting off in a job, then is there something wrong, because you're learning something new. And in order to learn more, you need to come up against challenges and start asking questions. And that's how that's how I learn by doing. But so don't be so hard on yourself, because everyone is making mistakes. Everyone at the top are making mistakes, and starting off, everyone's making mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it's I would say to anyone what I say to my daughters: don't limit yourself. Just don't set those limits for yourself. Plenty of people will try and set the limits for you as you go through life. So, decide what you want to do and go for it. And don't let anyone sort of derail you from that. Be determined, and yeah.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. It has been great to hear from the women of Zevo, different voices from a range of different backgrounds. As we mark Women's Day, it is both imperative that we look back at how far women have come and be grateful for this, while also looking at how far we still have to go. Thanks for listening to another episode of Zevo Talks.